For 32 years, I lived with the burning, suffocating weight of knowing my own father didn't want me. My mother raised me on a steady diet of bitter tears and tragic bedtime stories about the man who packed a suitcase when I was just 2 years old, walked out the front door, and never looked back. She told me he chose a life of freedom, money, and other women over being a dad, leaving us to drown in poverty and struggle. I grew up hating his shadow, blaming his phantom absence for every insecurity, every broken relationship, and every tear my mother ever shed. But 3 weeks ago, destiny played the most twisted, unimaginable joke on me when a frail, dying old man was wheeled into my hospice ward, and I looked down at his chart only to feel the entire world shatter beneath my feet. It was him. The monster from my mother's stories was lying in bed number 4, weighing barely 100 pounds, taking his final breaths under my direct medical care. Was I wrong for what I did next? Or would you have used that absolute power to get the ultimate, cruel revenge on the man who ruined your life? To really understand how I ended up standing over his dying body with a heart full of pure venom, you have to understand the childhood my mother built for me. We lived in a cramped, damp apartment that always smelled like cheap bleach and old cabbage. My mom worked 2 jobs, constantly reminding me that her back ached and her youth was stolen, because my father had abandoned us without a single dime of child support. She kept a single, faded photograph of him in a drawer, a tall man with thick dark hair and a wide, confident smile. Whenever I did something wrong, she would look at me with deep disappointment and say I was turning out just like him, selfish and heartless. I became a pediatric and hospice nurse specifically because I wanted to prove her wrong. I wanted to be the ultimate caregiver, the person who stays when things get ugly, the absolute antithesis of the man who ran away. I poured my life into my patients, burying my own deep-seated abandonment issues under layers of professional empathy, until the universe decided it was time for me to face my demons in the worst way possible. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when the ambulance brought in a new admission for palliative comfort care. The report said the patient was a 68-year-old male with end-stage pancreatic cancer, cognitively declining, with no listed next of kin and a do not resuscitate order. When they wheeled the stretcher into my unit, I walked over with my clipboard to do the intake assessment. I looked at the man lying on the crisp white sheets, his skin a translucent yellow, his eyes sunken and glassy, his breathing shallow and rattled. He looked like a ghost already, but there was something hauntingly familiar about the structure of his jaw and the shape of his ears. Then my eyes dropped to the intake paperwork. Arthur Vance. My breath caught in my throat. My stomach dropped like a lead weight into an abyss. I stared at his date of birth, and the numbers clicked together like a combination lock on a vault of buried trauma. This was my father. The man I had spent over 3 decades cursing, the man whose face I had studied in that single, stolen photograph, was now a helpless, dying creature completely dependent on my mercy. I remember standing there in the sterile silence of the room, listening to the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, feeling a wave of intense, blinding fury wash over me. It felt like 32 years of suppressed rage, confusion, and grief were suddenly boiling up into my throat, choking me. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to shake his fragile, bony shoulders and demand to know why I wasn't good enough, why he left a toddler behind, how he could live his entire life knowing he had a son out there in the world and never once try to find me. He was completely at my mercy now. I held the keys to his comfort, his pain medication, his dignity in his final hours. The dark, wounded child inside of me wanted to make him suffer just a fraction of the emotional agony he had inflicted on me for my entire existence. I could have just done the bare minimum, treated him like a number, or let him feel the cold, detached neglect that he had gifted to me. So that's the absolute nightmare of a situation I found myself in, and I had to make a choice that would define who I am as a human being forever. Before I tell you the shocking truth that came to light and what happened next, I want you to pause right now and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have walked away from his care entirely? Would you have confronted him on his deathbed? Or would you have used your position to exact some poetic justice? I didn't walk away. I took a deep, trembling breath, gripped the edge of his bed rail, and forced myself to stay. Over the next 3 days, I requested to be Arthur's primary nurse for every single shift. At first, I told myself I was doing it to find the right moment to confront him, to look into his eyes when he was lucid, and tell him exactly who I was before he died. He had brief moments of clarity between long stretches of heavy sedation and hepatic encephalopathy. On the second night, around 3 in the morning, the ward was dead silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Arthur stirred, his yellowed eyes fluttering open, focusing on me as I adjusted his IV line. He looked at me for a long time, his lips trembling, and in a cracked, barely audible whisper, he said my name. Not my grown-up name, but the childhood nickname only my mother used when I was a toddler. I froze, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I asked him how he knew that name. Tears began to stream down his hollow cheeks, pooling in the deep wrinkles of his face. He reached out a frail, trembling hand, his fingers twitching toward mine. He whispered that he knew it was me the moment he heard my voice the day before. He said he had prayed to God every single day for 32 years just to see my face one last time, even if I hated him. I braced myself for the lies, for the pathetic excuses of a man trying to buy his way into heaven at the final hour. I told him coldly that he had no right to use that name, not after he packed his bags and abandoned a 2-year-old child to live a life of selfish luxury. But what he said next completely shattered my reality and turned my entire life into a lie. Arthur shook his head weakly, sobbing so deeply that his chest heaved painfully against the hospital gown. He gasped out that he never wanted to leave me. He told me that 32 years ago, he discovered my mother was severely abusing drugs and neglecting me while he was at work. When he threatened to take me away and file for full custody, my mother, who came from a very wealthy, influential family with powerful legal connections, hired a corrupt lawyer and filed a barrage of false, horrific domestic abuse charges against him. She obtained a permanent restraining order and threatened that if he ever tried to contact us or see me again, she would use her family's money to plant drugs on him and put him in prison for life. He was a poor, working-class mechanic with no money for legal fees and no one to fight for him. He was completely broken, terrified, and forced into exile, paying child support directly to her family's lawyers every single month through an anonymous trust just to keep her from completely destroying what was left of his life. He told me he kept a scrapbook under his bed at home filled with every school photo, every newspaper mention, and every little detail of my life he could find from afar, watching me grow up like a ghost outside my own window. I stood there in the dark, my mind spinning into chaos as decades of hatred evaporated, replaced by a sudden, sickening realization. The villain wasn't the dying man in front of me. The villain was the woman who had raised me, the woman who had weaponized my love and fed me a poisoned script of lies for over 3 decades just to spite the man she couldn't control. I looked into my father's eyes, and I didn't see a monster anymore. I saw a victim. I saw a broken man who had loved me from a distance, carrying a crushing weight of sorrow all by himself while I spent my life cursing his name. In that moment, all the anger left my body. I grabbed his fragile hand, squeezed it tight, and wept openly at his bedside. I told him that I forgave him, that I knew the truth now, and that he didn't have to be alone anymore. For the final 24 hours of his life, I never left his side. I used my nursing authority to ensure he was completely pain-free, comfortable, and surrounded by love. I sat with him, holding his hand, listening to his fatting breaths and talking to him about my life, filling in the blanks of the years we had stolen from us. He passed away peacefully on a Thursday afternoon, holding my hand with a soft smile on his face. The aftermath of his death was a storm of mixed emotions. I went to his tiny, rented apartment to pack up his belongings, and sure enough, beneath his old mattress, I found a thick, battered leather scrapbook. It was filled with cut-out pictures from my high school yearbooks, articles about my nursing graduation, and even a printout of my hospital staff directory photo. He had loved me fiercely, quietly, and entirely from the shadows. When I finally confronted my mother with the scrapbook and the truth, she didn't even deny it. She just narrowed her eyes, smiled bitterly, and said she did what she had to do to keep him away from her property. I walked out of her house that day, and I haven't spoken a single word to her since. I legally cut her out of my life, realizing that the real abandonment didn't happen 32 years ago on a doorstep. It happened every single day she lied to my face and stole my father away from me. Finding my dad as my hospice patient was a heartbreaking, agonizing tragedy, but it was also the greatest gift the universe could have ever given me. It allowed me to give a dying man the dignity, closure, and love he deserved, and it finally set me free from a lifetime of living a lie. This experience taught me that the truth has a strange, inevitable way of rising to the surface, no matter how deeply it is buried under layers of malice and deceit. Life is far too short to hold on to hatred based on old stories, and sometimes, the people we are taught to despise are the ones who need our grace, empathy, and protection the most. If this story touched your heart or made you rethink the relationships in your own life, please hit the like button to show you we're on my side through this crazy journey. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deeply personal, shocking, and emotional stories just like this one every single week. I really want to hear what you think about my mother's betrayal and how I handled my dad's final days, so please share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Stay safe out there, and I'll see you all in the next video.